Namaste, everyone. Welcome to our next question-answer session. Before we begin, let me respond to some questions about why learning a bit of Sanskrit is included in this course. Here's the basic idea. In the course, we're all on a spiritual journey, so to speak, and the roadmap for our journey happens to be written in Sanskrit. That roadmap, as you know, is all the scriptures and texts on Advaita Vedanta. Now, to read an actual roadmap, you only have to be able to understand the names of roads and places. You don't have to read pages and pages of complicated directions. In the same way, for our 6-month course, you only have to be able to read and understand certain technical terms that we use a lot. That's all. If you really want to follow the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, then learning a bit of Sanskrit is definitely worth the effort. Here's a funny memory. When I was in high school, my parents forced me to take an elective class on typing, how to type by touch. I hated the class. In those days, we used clunky mechanical typewriters. But by the time I finished college, things were very different. My computer engineering colleagues back then really struggled, hunting and pecking at their keyboards with 2 fingers. But I was able to type effortlessly. I actually thanked my parents many years later for encouraging me to learn how to type. The story seems to convey a message that relates quite nicely to our situation here. Okay, let's turn to your questions now. Please remember to keep your questions very short, no more than just a few lines long. And I apologize in advance if we don't get to your question today. So, our first questions are on meditation. The first question comes from Rahul, who lives in Bangalore. Rahul asks, my meditation time, place, and duration often vary. Is that okay, or should they be fixed? I would say it's beneficial to have a fixed time, place, and location for meditation. That regularity will be reinforcing. If it's not possible, then it's not possible. If it is possible, it's helpful. Also, is it beneficial to have multiple short sessions throughout the day? I would suggest one somewhat longer session. Longer meaning just 15-20 minutes. But if you're thinking of several 5-minute sessions during the day, I don't think several 5-minute sessions would be a very good idea. Next question comes from Krishnaveni, who lives in San Diego, California. Do mantras have to be given by a guru? The majority of mantras do not. Handful of kind of tantrika mantras do need initiation, but in general, mantras do not need to be given by a guru. Can I chant Om Gang Ganapataye Namaha without formal initiation? Absolutely. Next question from Shyam Sundar. How long should I meditate during one session continuously? I'm unable to sit for more than 40 minutes. 40 minutes is a long time. For a beginner in the beginning, I think 15 minutes is a good target. And as you continue, maybe 20, 25, intermediate level, about 30 minutes, I would say is a good time for an intermediate level meditation. Then as you proceed, then 45 minutes to an hour, but only when you're more advanced. By the way, being advanced also means your body is more accustomed to sitting for a longer period of time. Next question from Lewis in Los Angeles, California also. I grew up Christian and have very little knowledge of Hindu deities, so choosing a mantra associated with Shiva or Vishnu would not be appropriate. I get that. I agree. Yes. I am by nature a secular person, so I would like to choose a mantra that reflects this. A secular mantra. Absolutely. And can you give a few options for this? I'm really glad Lewis asked this. You can choose any word or even a phrase that works for you. Years ago, a doctor who was teaching at Harvard University did a study on meditation, and in his study, he had all the participants used the word one, O-N-E, and one works very nicely for meditation. One, a little bit like Om, and it has a nice meaning, an important meaning. How about other words like peace, peace, peace? Or there's nothing wrong if you want to take a word from your own religious tradition. Why not Jesus, Jesus, Jesus? Absolutely okay. What's important is that it be a word that's meaningful for you and a word that helps you in meditation. So, good question. Next question from Neela, who lives in Wisconsin. She asks, the relaxation techniques that guided that part of the relaxation technique that I teach in the course in meditation involve parts of the body, but doesn't align with the chakras in the body. What is your opinion on the importance of chakras? Well, chakras are not in the body. Chakras are part of a ancient system of meditation based on visualization. So at various points in the body, these chakras are visualized and then used for the sake of a very, very complicated meditation technique. Because it's so complicated, I don't teach that technique. I don't recommend it. If you want to find out more about chakras and their role in meditation, I have an old video on YouTube on Kundalini, so you can look at that video. Next question from Harman. Harman asks, while performing silent mantra japa, mantra meditation, I find my mind performing subtle visualizations, like a thread with beads flowing through for each successive mantra being chanted, or visualizing the mantra's text and the syllable I'm reciting. Is this okay? I'm glad Harman asked this question. Visualization can be extremely helpful in meditation. Visualization can also be a complete distraction from meditation, and the only person who knows whether it's helpful or distracting is you. So I can't tell Harman or any of you whether or not you should use visualization, but the basic principle is if it's helpful, if it helps your mind stay focused on the meditation, if it helps you enter more deeply into a state of meditation, then by all means use any visualization you like, including visualization of the actual deity you're meditating on. On the other hand, if the image is a distraction in any way at all, then such visualization should be avoided. Okay, next some questions on attachment. First question from Usha, who's raising a child. With my child, Usha says, I'm often unable to clearly distinguish between my personal expectations for her and my genuine intention to shape her character and instill values that I believe are important. Let me set the context. In one of the videos you've watched and that Usha has watched, I mentioned that many times parents have a deep attachment for their children, and I distinguish between attachment and love. Attachment I defined as emotional dependence. Love is very pure. Emotional dependence is not love. Emotional dependence is not very pure. Emotional dependence is for you, not for the person. And that emotional dependence is what I call attachment. When I use the word attachment, I mean emotional dependence. So she as Usha is raising her daughter, she's confused. Am I telling my daughter to do things due to my emotional attachment, or am I telling my daughter to do things out of love for her? Usha says, I question whether my efforts are really a reflection of my own expectations and fears. Attachment. Emotional dependence means when your well-being depends on how your daughter is doing. So that means attachment. That means you're going to direct your daughter in such a way that you will feel better, regardless of whether it's better or not for daughter. So Usha wants to avoid that. But she says, that leaves me uncertain. Am I offering guidance, or am I unconsciously imposing my expectations under the guise of parenting? The fact that Usha is reflecting on this is the solution. The answer to her question is expressed right here. Be observant of your behavior and ask yourself that question. If a parent asks his or herself a question, am I offering genuine guidance to help my child, or am I unconsciously imposing my expectations on my child? Ask yourself that question. And you're the only person who can answer it. I can't answer it. If you are acting genuinely and exclusively, if your guidance is for the sake of the child, that's excellent parenting. But if, due to emotional dependence, due to attachment, you're kind of pushing your child in a certain direction because it makes you feel good, or because it avoids fear or anxiety, or because you want your expectations met, those are parenting styles that should be examined very carefully. Good question from Usha. Next question from Malika, who asks about attachment and identification. I'm not clear about the difference between the two. Attachment I just defined. Emotional dependence, when your sense of well-being depends on another person. So if the other person goes down and that affects you and pulls you down, how does that help anything? You need to be okay regardless of whatever is happening with the other person. Only then can you truly give unconditional love and support. If you get pulled down, you're no longer able to give that love and support to the other person. So that's the problem with emotional dependence. Identification is these are related words, but related in the sense that they're used in the same discussion, but the meaning is very different. Identification means, in this case, my son, my daughter. It's okay if that happens to somebody else's child, but not my child. You get the sense? My child. So that identification involves this attachment, and it's an unhealthy, I should say more specifically, an unhealthy identification is when it says, how can that happen to my child? That sense of pride or attachment, to use the same word before. Obviously, there's a more pragmatic sense of identification. This is my child. That's not a problem. The problem is emotional dependence. Okay. Question from Sheetal. Sheetal asks about emotional dependence causes suffering. She goes on to say it's very normal to have emotional dependence on very close people. It's normal, but is it good? Yes, it's normal. Is it desirable? Instead of being dependent on the person, shouldn't you be kind of strong enough inside and stable enough inside that you can be a support to them? If you're dependent, they have to support you. If you need support all the time, how are you supporting them? So emotional dependence is normal. It's natural, but it's not desirable. How does one deal with emotional dependence? Emotional dependence is to be outgrown. As we all start off in life with emotional dependence. As children, we're completely dependent on our parents, both physically dependent and emotionally dependent. As we grow up, then we're no longer physically dependent on our parents, but we might be emotionally dependent on our parents. And that's a sign we haven't grown up sufficiently. In the same way, in a marriage or any close relationship, there can be that same emotional dependence. Again, it's natural, it's normal, but as we become more mature, we outgrow that emotional dependence, which then makes us better able to be a support to others who might depend on you. Okay. Next questions. These questions are on, we had some, mostly about sukshma sharira, subtle body. And Maya, who lives in Singapore, she asks about that sukshma sharira, that subtle body, about travel. How does a sukshma sharira travel? Now remember from our videos, sukshma sharira describes that which enlivens a physical body. So physical body is enlivened by prana, life force, is enlivened by sense faculties, seeing, hearing, taste, smell, touch, faculties of motion, etc. And certainly that body is enlivened by all of our mental faculties. All of these collectively are called sukshma sharira, sukshma, subtle, sharira, body in a in a figurative sense. This body has a shape, has a form. Sukshma sharira has no shape, has no form. So to have the idea of some kind of nebulous entity leaving a physical body at the time of death, and that cloud-like entity travels through space seeking out another body, it's not like that. Sukshma sharira has no physical form. So how does it travel? Even the travel is a figurative kind of travel. Yes, we say that all the time, but physical things travel. Non-physical things don't really travel. So it would be more accurate. And yes, the doctrine of karma is fairly complex. So this is part of the complexity. To be more technically correct, instead of saying a sukshma sharira travels, it would be more accurate to say a sukshma sharira gets connected to another physical body. After the prior body dies, then the subtle body that inhabited that physical body later comes to inhabit another physical body. Metaphorically, we call it, I should say figuratively, we call it travel, not real travel. How long does it wait And where does it, how long does it wait? And where does it wait? Well, where, again, it's not a physical entity, so it's not waiting in a particular location. How long before reincarnation takes place? We have no idea whatsoever. There's no way of knowing. We can make an assumption. There are certain rituals that go on after death, usually for 13 days or so. So we presume for at least those 13 days that the reincarnation of that sukshma sharira has not yet taken place. But really speaking, we don't know how long it takes. Can a human sukshma sharira get an animal or plant stula sharira? There's no human sukshma sharira, it's just a sukshma sharira. That sukshma sharira can enter a human body. That same sukshma sharira can enter an animal's body. And if plants have sukshma sharira, I have no idea. If plants do have sukshma shariras, then that same sukshma sharira can enter a plant's body. There's no human or animal sukshma sharira. Those adjectives, human and animal, belong to the physical body. They don't apply to the subtle body. Next question from Arun. Arun lives in Virginia, here in the United States. Arun asks about the sukshma sharira that travels after death due to unfructified karmas. Figuratively travels after death due to the laws of karma. And Arun asks, does this sukshma sharira also include buddhi, intellect, and chitta, memory? Yes. But the follow-on question, when an incarnation takes reincarnation, do they start with a completely clean slate of intellect and memory, or are they seeded with the same intellect and memory from before? So what travels is buddhi, is the capacity for intellect, not the knowledge you have. Right now you have a buddhi, which is part of sukshma sharira. That buddhi is the capacity or power of thinking, does not include whatever knowledge or skills that you've attained in this lifetime. Same holds for chitta, memory. Chitta is the capacity for memory. It's not specific memories. In general, memories, yes, there are some anecdotal evidence of someone remembering something from a prior life. Anecdotes are unprovable. We don't know if they're true. We don't know if they're false. So we shouldn't rely on anecdotes for really understanding things properly. What we do know is that the ancient rishis understood chitta not as particular memories, but as a capacity for memory, not as particular memories. Also, we know from modern science that memories are stored in our brains, which is why someone who's undergone a stroke can lose memory. So we know for a fact that memories are stored in the physical body, memories are stored in the physical brain, and for that reason, at death, those memories are lost. Next question from Meena. Meena asks about the function of conscience in the sukshma sharira. Don't mix up the word consciousness and conscience, and Meera is not mixing them up, but some people do. The English word conscience is used to describe that inborn sense of right or wrong, that gut feeling that, oh, I shouldn't do this. And in English, we say that is your conscience. It's that inner voice that tells you what you should or shouldn't do. That inner voice, of course, comes from your mind. And by the way, that inner voice, have you ever noticed that voice sounds a little bit like your mother or father or some other authority figure in your life? Psychology explains conscience as an internalized form of the authority figures from childhood. When we were children, our parents and other authority figures kind of, allow me to say, they programmed us with a sense of right and wrong. And that programming that is in our minds and memories, that programming is what we generally call conscience. And so it's a mental faculty, mental function. It's really not part of the sukshma sharira at all. I would say it's more like a memory. Programming is the best way to describe it. Another question here from Tinky, who lives in Secunderabad. Tinky asks, I think in last week's satsang, there was a question about vasanas, mental impressions. And these mental impressions were said to be located in the karana sharira, and therefore with the karana sharira traveling from one life to the next, karana sharira, you remember, means causal body. I don't want to repeat that discussion. You can watch last week's video and see it. But I mentioned that this teaching is not part of mainstream Advaita Vedanta. Shankara never taught this. This is taught in the Yoga Vasishta and some other texts, which are not part of mainstream Advaita Vedanta. But nevertheless, Tinky asks, I said that the vasanas, mental impressions, which we, in Advaita Vedanta, we accept the existence of vasanas, mental impressions. We sometimes call that samskaras, mental impressions. But if the, same meaning, same thing, vasana or samskara. But if the cause, Tinky's question, if the causal body is not the seat of the vasanas, where are they stored? In the mind. Mental impressions are stored in the mind. Make sense? Vasana means mental impressions. Okay. Now, some questions on, we started studying the Bhagavad Gita, a number of thoughtful questions on related to study of Bhagavad Gita. First of all, somebody, there was one question. If this is a course on Advaita Vedanta, why are we studying the Bhagavad Gita? Interesting. That question should be asked, because at first glance, the Bhagavad Gita might seem to be quite dualistic. It's not at all. In fact, the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, this is just 1 minute of kind of scholarly information here. The teachings of Advaita Vedanta, as taught by Shankaracharya and his lineage, the teachings of Advaita Vedanta are said to be based on prasthana traya. Traya, three. Prasthana means basis, scriptural basis. There's a threefold scriptural basis for the teachings of Advaita Vedanta in the lineage of Shankaracharya. Those scriptures are the Upanishads, first and foremost. That's where the discovery of non-dual reality is found in the very first scripture. Then there's another technical text called Brahma Sutra, which is used to analyze, mostly. Those teachings in the Upanishad are analyzed in the scripture called Brahma Sutra. So the second in this Prasthana Traya. The third scripture of the three scriptures that form the basis for Advaita Vedanta, the third scripture is the Bhagavad Gita. It's given that much prominence, as much as the Upanishads. And in chapter 1 that we're studying right now, you won't find a shred of Advaita Vedanta, because chapter 1 is still part of the story of the Mahabharata. The 2,000 chapters in the Mahabharata leads us up to chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, and then followed by chapters 2 through 18, in which you'll find lots of very profound teachings on Advaita Vedanta. So no question that the Bhagavad Gita is a central text in the study of Advaita Vedanta. And let me just add something further. The teachings of Advaita found in the Upanishads, these teachings were given by these great rishis who had these amazing faculties and understanding, and as a result, the teachings of the Upanishads are often difficult to grasp. They're so lofty. In the Bhagavad Gita, we see the same teachings of the rishis, but in a more down-to-earth manner. The context. Look at the difference in contexts. In the Upanishads, the context is these great rishis teaching their disciples. And they're living in simple gurukulams, hermitages, along the banks of sacred rivers and up in the Himalayas. So a very rarefied kind of context, very spiritual context. What is the context of the Bhagavad Gita? As you know, it's a battlefield. The Bhagavad Gita presents, Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita presents the same teachings of the ancient rishis in the context of a battlefield, and of course symbolically that battlefield represents the battlefield of your life. So contextually, the teachings of non-dualism found in the Bhagavad Gita are easier to grasp because the context is much more familiar to us. If you live up in the Himalayas, maybe the context is less helpful, but for all of us living in more typical worldly life, the context of a battlefield representing the battle of life, much more helpful. The teachings of Advaita Vedanta in this more worldly context, rather than the other worldly, spiritual context of the rishis. Okay, enough said. First question here, or with regard to the Bhagavad Gita, Jeremy asks a question. You've stressed on multiple occasions that the war at the heart of the Bhagavad Gita is a dharma yuddha, a righteous battle, in the sense that not fighting the war causes more harm than fighting it. And Jeremy understands this very well. But he makes this observation. Jeremy says, using the concept of dharma yuddha to justify violence feels like a slippery slope. Can be. We can twist. We can twist around things all the time. In modern English, we say putting a spin on something. It's possible to put a spin on something to make it look righteous. For example, and Jeremy mentions that I gave two examples, an example of a dharma yuddha and a counter example. The example I gave was World War II. Not to fight World War II would have caused, if the United States had not entered into World War II, the consequences would have been far worse than fighting World War II. But then I gave a counterexample, which was the war in Vietnam, which in retrospect seems to have accomplished very little. And I think the vast majority of historians would agree without question that the war in Vietnam should not have been fought by the United States. It was a mistake. It was definitely not a dharma yuddha. But now suppose we try to put a spin on the Vietnam War and try to make it look more like a dharma yuddha spin. Or as Jeremy says, putting it on a slippery slope, which means distorting facts, making it look different from what it really is. Actually, that's not exactly what Jeremy means by slippery slope, but his question goes on to say, who gets to determine what constitutes a dharma yuddha? Who gets to decide what causes more harm, what causes less? Beth writes the same question. Who gets to decide what is a dharma yuddha and what is not? It's not that anyone gets to decide. It's a matter of discernment. It's a matter of being objective. It's not a matter of personal opinion. Of course, that's a big issue in political affairs. There are plenty of political issues. But fighting a war, sadly, fighting wars is too often based on political opinion. The criteria of dharma yuddha takes that decision-making out of the realm of political opinion and puts it in a realm of objectivity. And the objective basis is simply, does fighting this war cause more harm or less harm? That's an objective basis. It's not a political opinion, and that objective basis is to be understood and discerned as carefully as possible. And usually sadly, that's not the case. Too often wars are fought for all the wrong reasons. We needn't go further into that. Next question from Satya, who lives in Bangalore. Satya asks, even a wise and virtuous person like Arjuna, who knows what is right, who knows what is dharma, can be completely overcome, incapacitated by his own emotions, not by external enemies. In my talk on the first, in my introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, we discussed this quite a bit. Then, what does that reveal about the real source of human suffering? I think we also discussed in the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, that metaphorical battlefield is a battle inside of us. The battle, you can say the battle between right and wrong, the battle between dharma and adharma, the battle between what is right and what you want, the battle between fulfilling duties and fulfilling desires. All of these conflicts constitute an inner battlefield, which we discussed. And that inner battlefield is where suffering arises. Due to those inner conflicts, suffering arises. And Satya goes on to ask, why does the solution require turning inwards rather than fixing external circumstances like jobs, relationship, and health? That is, why do we need a spiritual solution? Let me rephrase Satya's question. It's a good question. If suffering is a result of problems with jobs, relationship, and health, then why do we seek a spiritual solution to that suffering? Why shouldn't we instead try to fix up the jobs, relationship, and health problems? Well, first of all, of course, whatever you can do to solve problems with jobs, relationship, and health, whatever can be done, should be done. But we all know very well that no matter how hard we try to solve those problems with our jobs, with our relationship, and with our health, no matter how hard we try, we continue to have problems that we can't solve. Some problems we can solve, some we can't. Which means no matter what, we will suffer as a result of jobs, relationship, and health, no matter how hard we try to solve those problems. Therefore, worldly solutions are helpful, but they're not enough. That's why we have spiritual solutions, including the solutions found in the Bhagavad Gita. Okay. Next question from Mangesh. Mangesh, similar question. Somewhat similar question. Mangesh notes that in the battle of the Mahabharata was fought on Kurukshetra, the battlefield, and Mangesh, by the way, lives in Thane near Mumbai in India. And Mangesh says, at Kurukshetra, the enemies were clearly on the opposite side. Good guys and bad guys were pretty obvious. The good guys were with Sri Krishna on the Pandava side of the battlefield, and the bad guys were with Duryodhana on the far side of the battlefield. So it's more black and white, but not completely black and white, as Mangesh observes. He says the fact is, in our lives, enemies are frequently with us instead of against us. He doesn't give any examples, but a good example would be a relative who becomes an enemy. A relative of yours should be on your side, but sometimes a relative, someone related to you by blood, can turn on you. So it's not clear then who's friend and who's enemy. It becomes blurred, the line. Mangesh also says it's difficult to find out who is on the side of dharma. And then he comments about some saints there are some saints who are working for the well-being of people, but there are other saints who have a personal agenda and an inclination sometimes to get money or power, even do so by means of adharma. We can easily get under their wrong influence. We don't want to get trapped in the dharma, lose our way. How can the teachings of Bhagavad Gita help us with these modern challenges? Mangesh is pointing out the complexity of life. Dealing with dharma and adharma, it's not black and white. Nothing in our lives seems to be black and white. Even on the Mahabharata battlefield, Mangesh himself observes that, where does he say? He said, among the enemies, so Sri Krishna and Arjuna are on one side, among their enemies are some very good people on the other side. Bhishma is on the opposite side. Drona is on the opposite side. Kripacharya, their teacher, was on the other side. Family guru was on the other side. Bhishma, the family patriarch. Dronacharya, Arjuna's beloved teacher. And Kripa, the family guru, were among the enemies because of the very complex situation that arose, that you understand when you read the whole of the Mahabharata. The complexity of the story leads these three good people and others to end up on the wrong side of the battlefield due to complex situations in that story. It just shows how complicated life is, and it makes it very difficult for us to discern dharma and adharma when things are not black and white, when things are gray. In Sanskrit, we use the term dharma sankata. In fact, sankata means conflict. Arjuna's situation was a dharma sankata. To fight against his own family members was terrible, but not to fight against his own family members was also a problem. So if you forgive the American English, you're damned either way. You take course A or course B, it's bad. There's no good choice. That represents a lot of situations we encounter in life. There are problems associated with all of our choices. How to discern the path of dharma when it's so complicated. We use the words dharma and adharma, makes it sound black and white, but it's not. And if you'll allow me to be a little bit technical here for just a moment, adharma does not mean no dharma. That syllable, that negation, doesn't mean none, no, not. In fact, in Sanskrit, there are, I think, 5 different meanings for that or na. The negative particle has several meanings. One of the meanings is little or minimum. Let me explain that. If somebody asks you for a loan, they want $1,000, and your answer is, "I'm sorry, I'd like to help you, but I don't have any money right now." When you say, "I don't have any money right now," does it mean you have no money at all? Zero? It doesn't mean that. You say, "I don't have any money right now," means I don't have enough money right now. I have little money right now. And that's a nice way of understanding that word adharma. So adharma is not the opposite of dharma. It's not black and white. The best way to understand the word adharma is minimum harm, the least harm. The adharma in general is harm. The principle of adharma is to take the path of least harm. So when you have 2 options, you can evaluate to the best of your ability which option leads to the least harm. If you have many options, 5 or 10 options, you do the best to figure out which of these options lead to the least harm for everyone involved. You discern the best you can. And if you're having a hard time discerning, then get some advice from someone you trust, someone who is wise. Okay, one more question for today. This question comes from Sushil. Sushil asks, related, how can an ordinary person know whether their actions are aligned with dharma and not aligned with adharma? Can you explain this with a daily life example? How can I tell whether my action is coming from clarity and responsibility rather than ego, fear, greed, anger, and attachment? Is there a practical guideline? Because with a limited intellect, I may unknowingly choose adharma while thinking I am acting according to dharma. Sushil has very nicely expressed the challenge of living a life of dharma. Our own minds can put a spin on things. Our minds can distort things. I spoke once of rationalization, where we invent reasons to turn adharma into dharma. Let me make that very clear. Favorite example of a rationalization is when you tell you're about to do something that is questionable. Is it right or wrong? Is it dharma or dharma? Suppose it's questionable. So you tell yourself, well, just this once I'll do it. That expression, just this once, is a rationalization. You are giving yourself an excuse to do something that is doubtful, whether it's actually dharmic, probably not dharmic, but you're giving yourself an excuse. Well, okay, I'll only do it once. It's a lousy excuse. You would call it a lame excuse in American English. It's a lame excuse because if you do it once, then you're more likely to do it a second time, right? Right. So to say just this once is a lame excuse. It's pure rationalization. It's a spin. How to know? How to avoid that? It takes It takes a lot of inner maturity. And inner maturity, clarity, so she'll use nice expressions. How to know when my action is coming from clarity and a clear understanding of my responsibilities. It takes a great degree of maturity and emotional growth to come to that point. How to avoid being driven by ego, fear, greed, anger, and attachment. Again, it's a matter of emotional growth. So the problem is what to do, as he asks, in a practical advice for a practical guideline, how to make that judgment. First of all, I can't give you any practical guideline. It's all what's happening inside of you. And there's every situation, this needs to be said, every situation is different. Every situation is unique. So the only guideline we can give is choose the path of least harm. That is the practical guideline that Sushila is asking for. Unfortunately, there are situations where it's so complicated, and there are other situations where we lack wisdom, we lack emotional maturity, and we may not be able to follow that practical guideline properly. We may put a spin on our situation, we may rationalize our situation, and therefore fail to follow that practical guideline of taking the course of least harm. What to do? Well, first of all, we can only do the best we can. As human beings, we are subject to making mistakes. We act to the best, let me try to put it in clear terms. When faced with a decision, should I do this or that? You can discern to the best of your ability which course of action leads to the least harm, or conversely, which course of action leads to the most benefit. And you, based on your discernment to the best of your ability, you choose that course of action. Then, suppose later you found out that you made a mistake for whatever reason. The discernment was erroneous, or there was some kind of spin or some kind of rationalization. Suppose you discover you made a wrong mistake. For our mistakes, there are consequences. We deal with those consequences in an appropriate way. For we all make mistakes, right? I've made so many mistakes. We all make mistakes. So, and it's inevitable because none of us are perfect. Our minds and bodies will never be perfect. Therefore, we will never be able to perfectly discern the right course of action. My guru very nicely said, how to make a decision when you're not sure. And what he said was just practical wisdom. You make a decision based on what you know today. If you discover in the future that you've made a wrong decision, then you deal with the consequences. If it means changing your decision later, change it. If it means cleaning up a mess that you created because of your wrong decision, then clean it up. We make mistakes, it's inevitable, then we own the consequences. We own up the consequences. We're mature enough to accept the fact, okay, I made a mistake. And then we do our best to rectify that mistake the best we can. That's the best we can do, right? We make mistakes because we're not infallible beings. We make mistakes. Then we admit when we've made a mistake, and we do our best to rectify the situation, knowing that having made that mistake will be wiser in the future. So as we go on in our lives, we'll make fewer and fewer mistakes. If you are growing emotionally and spiritually, you will find that you make fewer and fewer mistakes as you go forth in your life, because that emotional and spiritual maturity will help prevent you from making so many mistakes. So we'll be blessed by that emotional and spiritual maturity. Good questions. We'll see more next week, and end with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.